Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and get into the discussion of process costing. Okay, now process costing is something that a company will use if they are manufacturing homogeneous goods. In other words, every single product is going to be exactly the same. Each one is identical as they produce that. That is different from what we learned in Chapter 3, where we use job order costing. And with job order costing, of course, you remember that we took our direct materials, our direct labor, our manufacturing overhead. What do we call those? What do we call those? Our manufacturing costs, right? And we did what? We would take them to each job. Our direct materials, direct labor, we took directly to each job. The manufacturing overhead, we had to apply it to the job, but we tracked that by job, didn't we? And we did that because each item was unique. If we were producing a shipbuilder, what would happen? The way we build a cruise liner is going to be a lot different from the way we build a battleship or something, right? So each product is unique. We track by job. Once we have finished our job, we come out of work in progress into finished goods, out of finished goods into cost of sold job by job, right? Some products don't lend themselves to a job order costing process, a system. So we call that process costing. It might be a little hard to see from your seat, but what these are boxes of cornflakes, okay? And so what happens? If we're producing cornflakes, right, each box of cornflake is pretty much the same, right? I mean, there might be, insignificant differences between them, but pretty much every box is the same. Now, sometimes I get students say, well, what about frosted flakes? Those are different. Well, that's a different product, right? That's a completely different batch that we would run. But the cornflakes themselves, if it's just the standard cornflakes, each box is the same, right? We consider these to be homogeneous goods, and we would use process costing for that, and they are going to be uniformly produced. So if that's the case, we're using process costing. Rather than keeping track of our costs by job, we will keep track of our costs by department. Okay, so we'll track and it's still going to be our direct materials, our direct labor, our manufacturing overhead. We're still going to have those same three manufacturing costs, but now we're going to do what? Track those costs as they move from one department to the next. Okay, so what happens? You come over, and again, you have your direct materials, your direct labor, your manufacturing overhead, but you will track it to the first department. You will have those same costs in your second department, and then as the product is done in Department 1, we will track the cost of the finished product out of Department 1 into Department 2. So going back to the cornflake example, I'm going to pretend like we have two departments. We have a flake department where the flakes are made, and we have a boxing department where the flakes are put into the box, right? And what's going to happen? Once the flakes are done, they'll be transferred out of the flake department and into the box department, right? And then from the box department out to cost of goods sold, right? Okay, finished goods and then cost of goods sold. So that's what we're going to use as our example, and we're going to use T accounts to help us to follow the way these costs would be tracked from one department to the other. We have two departments here. We have Department A and Department B. Okay, and I'm going to say that Department A is going to be the flake department. Department B is going to be the boxing department. It even works with the letters, right? B for boxing. Okay, and so what happens? We have direct materials. Come on in. We have direct materials in what? In each one of the departments. In the flake department, we have, I don't know, corn meal and water and flour and eggs. I don't know what they put in to actually make cornflakes, right? But whatever it is, they're mixing them up, etc., right? Then, I don't know, I guess they bake the corn flakes or something. I actually knew a guy who worked in a cereal factory, and what he told me is when they bake it as one big flake, and then it sits on some sort of shaking machine that shakes it and cracks it into the familiar cornflake shape. So all of that's happening in what? Happening in the flake department, isn't it? And what happens? We go ahead and we put our materials, our flour, our water, our corn, whatever. How about the boxing department? Do they have corn and water in there? No, they're going to have what? Boxes and the wax paper that they put inside the boxes, whatever, and they're sitting there folding the boxes up, getting ready for the flakes to come in so they can stuff the flakes into the box, and off they go, right? Now, usually in a managerial accounting class like this, they just consider two departments. There could be what? Multiple departments that have to process an item as it goes from one department to the other, okay? But we issue our direct materials. We issue them to Department A, corn, flour. We issue it to Department B, boxes and wax paper, right? But our direct materials are coming in. Then what? Then we go ahead and we put our direct labor. And in the flake department, I guess it's the baker or whatever, the cook. In the boxing department, it's the guy who folds the boxes and puts the flakes in the box, right? Okay. Then what? What's our other manufacturing cost? 3 manufacturing costs, guys. Got to know this. What? Direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, right? So we go ahead and we apply the overhead to each of the departments. I don't know, maybe it's mostly electricity for Department A because we have a bunch of machines mixing stuff up and, breaking the flakes apart. And then what? In Department B, maybe most of our overhead is going to be in direct labor or whatever, but we're going to go ahead and what? Apply our overhead. And we could apply it using a company-wide overhead. We could also have a department-specific overhead as well. We don't have to have just one company-wide predetermined overhead rate, although that's what we're going to be doing in this class. But we will quickly talk, I think it's in Chapter 7, we'll talk about something called draw a blank on what it's called, activity-based costing, in which we will have multiple overhead rates, and you'll see how that works. I'm not going to hold you accountable to a lot of questions on that, but could be multiple rates. But anyway, however we're applying it, we're going to do what? We're going to apply it to both departments, right? Either a company-wide rate or a department-specific rate, right? And so we go ahead, we apply our overhead. So do we have all of our manufacturing costs now? We have all of our manufacturing costs, don't we, in our work in process? And so now what's going to happen? Now the cost of the flakes, the what? And we call that the amount that's transferred, the cost of goods manufactured for the flakes, are going to go out of the flake department and into the boxing department, aren't they? Where they can then be stuck in these boxes. Okay, and so whatever additional processing happens in Department B is added to our work in process, whatever additional labor, etc. we have to have. We finish those things up. They're all in the boxes, and then what? Then we take those cost of goods manufactured out of our Department 2, our boxing department, into finished goods, out of finished goods, and into what? Into our cost of goods sold, right? So the only difference between process costing and job order costing was there was an intervening department in which we did what? We took the cost of all of the things in one department and sent it to another department, right? Other than that, we gathered our manufacturing costs in our work in process, although we did it by department. Our what? Our direct labor, our direct materials, our manufacturing overhead. They were gathered in each department. When the things in Department 1 are ready to go to Department 2, we simply take it out of Department 2 by crediting the work in process. And instead of going into finished goods, it goes to what? Second department, doesn't it? And then in our final processing department, it will eventually go out of there and into finished goods, out of finished goods and into cost of goods sold, right? Okay. Question? Okay, let's take a look at this question. I was having some trouble with this question because this wanted to keep sticking over here or something. and I fixed it by looking at the codes, and then I forgot to turn reveal codes off. So if you're wondering what all those little squigglies are, it was just that I had the reveal codes on when I was trying to make this thing line up right. So anyway, which of the following companies would most likely use a process costing system? Okay, now you look at that first one and you can see that's the right answer because I bolded it, right? A utility producing natural gas. But a lot of times the best way to answer these questions is to eliminate the ones that are clearly what? Job order costing, right? So you look at this, a law firm is going to be job order costing. The, cost associated with defending a murder case is going to be a lot different than the cost of defending, jaywalking or something stupid like that if you would go to an attorney. But obviously, the more complicated the case, the more the cost. So each cost is what? Unique. Each, I should say, case is unique, isn't it? Okay. How about a furniture manufacturer? Well, each item is going to be a little different. The cost that goes into a table versus a chair is going to be different, right? Okay, so we would use job order costing. A shipbuilder, I gave that example earlier. The cost associated with a battleship is going to be a lot different than the cost associated with a cruise liner or something, right? Obviously different products. So utility producing natural gas is going to be the one that is the process costing. So I don't know natural gas exactly what they do with it. In fact, I have no idea what they do with natural gas. I do know, however, that have you ever smelled gas? When there's a gas leak, you ever smelled gas? Is that the natural smell of that gas? That is not the natural smell of that gas. It is odorless. And if you breathe it, it will kill you, right? So what do? They go ahead and they put that rotten egg smell, they put it in there, right? And so what happens? In the, gas department, they produce the gas, and then in the smell department, I don't know, they put the smell in, and then they have, a tanking department where they put it into the tanks, where then each tank of natural gas is exactly the same, isn't it? Okay, so that would be an example of process costing. The other one that I thought of is process costing. I don't know if you've seen on YouTube or on TV, maybe you watched it. Jimmy Kimmel has this thing with Snoop Dogg where he has to try to guess what's being made. And there was one where he had to figure out it was a sausage factory. He's watching all this stuff come down the thing, and he's like, what are they making, paper? I don't know. And I thought about showing that video, but he gets bleeped out about every 2 minutes, every 2 seconds on that. So I figured, but he ends up saying, I'm never eating hot dogs again, because he sees all that stuff. But anytime you have you have something that's going to be homogeneous, each hot dog is different, each hot dog is the same, that's going to be what? That's going to be process costing. Okay? Okay, good. Which of the following products is least likely to use process costing? And this question obviously is old, compact discs, okay? What's a compact disc? I actually bought a software for my computer, or a device, I guess it's a hardware for my computer, because I have poor internet access, that you stick it in and it kind of pops up as a USB, and then you're supposed to get better internet access from this thing. They told me, oh yeah, that'll fix your problem. Here, no problem. So I go, okay, good. I take it home, I open it up, and the little thing that you're supposed to stick in the computer says, stop. Before you do anything, make sure you load the CD that comes with this. I'm like, CD that comes with it? And there's a CD in there. I don't have a CD drive on this thing. I mean, it's ridiculous. When I'm going to take it, that thing's going back, right? So I don't know, compact disc. But what? Each disc is going to be pretty much the same, right? Okay? And so that would be process costing. Slacks for casual wear, you have different sizes, but pretty much each slack is going to be the same. Baseball hats, they're the same. Calculators, they're the same. Custom cabinets, and what's the key word that helps you to answer that one? Custom, right? If it's custom, that means it's unique. Okay? Okay, again, so sometimes it's easy to sort of find the one that stands out to answer these kind of questions. Okay? Question? That's it. That's all I'm going to expect from you, Chapter 4, is that you understand the nature of the type of companies that would use process costing. Okay? There is this notion of equivalent units that, many managerial accounting instructors would, I guess, think they need to cover with you. I don't believe in it, because when I got my cost accounting students, I had to start all over with them and teach it to them all over again. And I'm like, well, if you're going to have to learn it again anyway, if you're an accounting major, then why bother you with it now? You can just learn it then. And if you're not an accounting major, you will never mention equivalent units again for the rest of your life, because this is a dorky, nerdy accounting thing that we do to track our costs through our system. So I don't think it's necessary. Okay? All right, so what does that mean? That means that we are prepared to go into our practice midterms. There are 2 of them sitting on iLearn. I'm going to work this one first that starts with this Donner Party thing. There's 2 of them. I think if you're trying to find on your computer, it's the one that's called, what, Practice Midterm 1 or something. And then there's another one that says third practice midterm. If you're wondering where the second practice midterm went, I deleted it because I decided I didn't like it. Okay? Hello? Yeah? Okay, so we're ready to do this? Okay. This is pretty much all we're going to do till the midterm now, is sit here and go through. You should, at this point, know how to work these questions, and we're just going to fine-tune our skills now for working these questions. And we're going to start out with this Donner one. And this Donner one is a good example of the question that I'm going to give you on your exam, which is going to be comprehensive, in which you're going to have to sit here and know how to take a fact pattern and work your way all the way through from the high-low method to coming up with our cost formula for our manufacturing overhead, figuring out what the total manufacturing overhead is going to be, dividing that by the estimated number of units, coming up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, applying the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate to the job, seeing if there's an amount that is under, over applied, figuring out what the costs are that are going to be transferred out of our work in process into our finished goods and our cost of goods sold, right? Okay, and it's all going to be connected in one question, like this one. Okay, so this is a good representation of what you're going to get in these files. Since these files have various chapters of material, I've gone ahead and indicated to you the chapter as to where we covered the information that answers the question. Okay, and so you come over and we have this Donner, and they have the labor hours, and they have the maintenance cost. And maintenance cost would be an example of our overhead cost, right? Okay, so that's our overhead for these various months. And you come down, and in this problem, they ask me to use the high-low method, don't they? Okay, so the hardest part of the high-low method is looking at the table of numbers I'm going to give you. And I'm probably going to give you one with more numbers on it, and figuring out which one is high and which one is the low, right? So which one is the high here? Which month? Huh? April with the 190, good. That's the high. How about the low? Low is going to be May. That'd be kind of weird to have 2 months back to back, one high, one low, but I guess it could happen, right? Okay? Okay, good. So now we're going to sit there and we're going to come up and let's see what they ask us first. And this one, they asked me to come up first with the variable cost per labor hour. Do we know how to do that? We simply do what? We take the difference between and this is going to be the y, this is going to be the x, isn't it? And just remember we said y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1, right? Isn't that how we come up with the slope of the line? Okay, and the variable cost is the slope of the line. For each unit you produce, your costs go up, right? Okay, and so we just go ahead and we do the math here. The difference between my total cost divided by the driver, in this case labor hours, that gives me what? 1.1375 is my variable cost per direct labor hour, just like we did in chapter 2, right? Okay, when we had the high-low method. And so we come over, and there's the answer, isn't it? Okay. Now, when you're working this question, guys, be careful. Even though you'll get the answer as a rounded number, for the rest of the calculations, don't use the rounded number. Use the number that you got as the answer, because you start getting into rounding error, and I can't sit here and control rounding error for you, and all of a sudden you start getting confused because the numbers are a little bit off. So stick with whatever the readout is on the screen for that number, right? Okay. Question on that? Okay, good. So we come over and we take a look at now this next question now, and there's, if you're saying how did we get to number 9, I pulled these out of an old exam, and so whatever number they were at that point in time. But now we want to get the fixed cost, don't we? Okay, remember our fixed cost obviously is our total cost minus our variable cost. Okay, and when you do that, you pick up your total cost, and you could pick it up at the high or the low. And in this particular example, they picked it up, and I'm kind of redrawing lines that I've already drawn in here. They picked it up at what? At the high, didn't they? The total cost at the high? And then if that's the case, and remember, leave that long number in your calculator screen, whatever, and you just do what? You pick up, and you have to make sure you pick up the number of hours at the high as well, don't you? Okay, and when you do, you go ahead and you are now going to subtract your variable cost off the total cost. That difference is going to be our fixed cost, isn't it? Total cost minus variable cost is fixed cost, right? Okay, so we take that off. Good. Then what? Then I say that if they estimate that we're going to have 1540 hours, what is the total estimated overhead? And that was the whole point of our exercise here, and I forgot to say plus the fixed cost. Might help if I say plus fixed cost of what? 406.875. I forgot to put plus the fixed cost, right? We'd have to come up with what? 406.875. That's our fixed cost that we just calculated in the previous problem, right? Plus and I calculated in the first problem my variable cost per unit, and then I have to do what? Plug in whatever the estimated direct labor hours are. That's going to give me my total estimated manufacturing overhead, isn't it? Right? And so I get that number, my total estimated manufacturing overhead, I get that number right here. That's the answer to that question, isn't it? $2,158.625. Okay? So I have now my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. And notice, guys, how we went from chapter 2, now we're in chapter 3, right? So you can use those chapter designations to kind of show how what we've learned in these first couple of chapters ties together. Now we have the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, don't we? Or we'll be able to get it? Okay? And so that's the next question. I say, well, what's the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Let me erase some of this junk. I'll get rid of some of this. I'll redraw the lines because it's getting a little hard to see where all this is going now that I've drawn all over this thing a couple times. So when we sit there and we do what? We come up with our total overhead, 2158.625. We divide it by what? We divide it by the estimated number of hours we have, this 1540, and I now have my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, don't I? Right? Okay, so I've got that now, and I say, okay, great. I've got that, and then the company starts to work. They get to work during the year, and as they actually produce items, they incur an actual number of labor hours of 1,600. So I apply my manufacturing overhead based on the actual number of hours that I've worked, don't I? If I'm using direct labor hours as my driver. So I take that 1,600 times the $1.40 per unit. Where'd the $1.40 come from? Right there. And I probably should have followed my own rule and kept that longer number in there so I don't come up with a funny answer. And that gives me what? 2240 is the amount of overhead that had been applied for this year. I took my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate times my actual number of hours, right? Where am I going to do with that 2240? What am I going to do with the 2240? Journal entry, now that I've applied it. If I'm applying it, what's the journal entry? I apply it, where does it go? Okay, you're remembering something, but not what I'm asking though, because what you're talking about is if I have an under or over applied overhead. Okay, but at this point we're simply applying the overhead. When you apply the overhead, where does it go? Huh? It goes to the work in progress, doesn't it? Right? Isn't that what we do? Is we apply the overhead, the direct materials go direct, the direct labor goes direct. The what? The manufacturing overhead applied, we credit the applied, we debit the work in progress, right? Meanwhile, we're debiting the actual for the actual, aren't we? Right? And then there's going to be an under or over applied that we're going to have to close out, and that's when we get into deciding whether we put it all in cost of goods sold or allocate it between work in progress, finished goods, and cost of goods sold, right? We're clear on that? Okay, so we're going ahead and we're applying it based on the number of hours. Now, this next part of this question is I just pick out a particular job now. This is job 113. I'm just making this up. There wasn't any information previously that you would have known anything about job 113. And what happens? I sit there and I start to gather the cost of this one job here. And I'm going to take the direct labor hours, 16 hours at $15 an hour. That's $240 for direct labor. I just tell you the what? Direct materials. I give you this company-wide advertising number. Why did I give that to you? Huh? No, it's not. It is expensed. I gave it to you to confuse you. Okay, to confuse you or to have you prove to me that you know that that should be ignored. That is expense. That is not part of the cost of my product. That's not going to work in progress. Remember, guys, we're gathering costs that is going to be in work in progress, will be in finished goods. It won't hit the income statement until we sell the thing, right? Where our selling expenses, we said go, obviously if we call it expense, goes directly to expense, right? Okay, so we would ignore that, but we are going to gather our manufacturing costs. What are our manufacturing costs? Our manufacturing costs, not numbers but words. Direct labor, direct material, and what? Manufacturing overhead, actual or applied? The applied, good. Right? So we're going to gather those costs by sitting here, and if this is my work in progress, I'm going to debit it for what? For $240 for the labor, $320 for the direct materials. How about the manufacturing overhead? How about the manufacturing overhead? How about the manufacturing overhead? We're using direct, I'll give you a hint, we're using direct labor hours. There's that 16, right? That's 16 direct labor hours. Where'd this 140 come from? Huh? predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, right? Which was my what? Which was my variable cost per unit plus my fixed cost divided by the estimated number of units I thought I was going to produce this year, right? And I apply that for each job, don't I? Okay, so I go ahead and I apply that. So that's what, $22.40, whatever? $22.40? Okay. Uh-huh. Yes, the 16 was given to you, the number of hours that they applied, but you had to sit there and know how to, multiply the number of hours times the rate, and both the labor rate, the $15 per hour, plus the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which was what, $1.40 per hour. Okay, but yes, the 16 was given to you, and so I'd go ahead and I'd debit this 22.40. Doesn't look any better than the first time I wrote it. But anyway, $22.40. That's the manufacturing overhead. $22.40. Okay. So the cost of this job, I say, what is the cost of job 113? The cost is what? The direct labor, the direct material, and the applied manufacturing overhead, isn't it? So the total is what? $582.40. Okay. Okay, good. So I've gathered my costs now, and I say here, what is Donner's over or under applied overhead? Now at that point, I'm talking about what? Company-wide, right? I'm talking about company-wide. So they tell me that the actual, I say that the actual is 3,000. So if I'm telling you that the actual is 3,000, not actual, what is this, manufacturing overhead? And that's my manufacturing overhead. And the actual's on this side, isn't it? The applied's on this side. Okay, and so the actual, what did I say, is 3,000? If the actual is 3,000 and I've debited the manufacturing overhead for that, I must have credited something else, right? What did I credit? Close. I must have credited my salaries payable. If you want to get some indirect labor in there, it would have been for salaries payable, whatever that was, say 1,000. I'm just making these numbers up. But salaries payable would have been part of the credit. Good. Good. Excellent. Raw materials, that's for what? That's going to be for my, so I've got my indirect labor, well, it's the total 3,000, but this part would be my indirect labor, right? Right? And you got my indirect materials over here, so I would have credited my raw materials for the indirect materials. Good. Any others? Huh? Good. The utilities. Maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's another 1,500. And what'd you say, sir? Utilities? Right, the utilities payable. Good. Right, and that's going to be credited, obviously, for what, 500 here? And the total of all those credits are a debit to manufacturing overhead, right? Okay, excellent. Good, good. Now what happens? On the factory-wide basis now, not just this one job, but factory-wide for all my jobs combined, I tell you that they incurred how many direct labor hours for the period? 16 is just the one job. How much for the whole factory? And you got to come back up to see that it was what? Okay, where is it though? Here it is. The 1,600 was the actual number of hours that they had incurred for the whole factory now. So we tracked it for one job, but now I'm blowing back up to the whole factory here now, right? And so for the whole factory, they incurred 1,600. How many hours did they think they were going to incur at the beginning of the year? They thought they were going to incur what? 2,000, I don't know where 2,240 is the actual amount that they've applied. during the period. 2,240 is the actual amount that they have applied because they took their predetermined what is it, 2,240? Because they took what? Their predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which was 1.40. They multiplied it by the actual number of hours that they incurred for the year, which was what? 1,600. Is that how we got that number roughly? The applied? Okay. My question is, how many hours did they think they were going to incur during the year when the year started, or in June before they were starting this, before they got into the year when they were estimating their overhead? They thought it was going to be what? 1,540, but the actual was what? 1,600, isn't it? Are they dumb? Are they dumb? No, I think they're pretty good, right? I mean, they got a pretty good estimate. They got pretty close, didn't they? Okay, but they're never going to be perfect. They're not going to get it exactly. I mean, if I walked in and I was trying to audit a company and they said, "Oh yeah, John, you know what? We incurred exactly the number of hours that we thought we were going to," I'd be like, "Yeah, right. These are liars, and I'm going to really have to start look closely now at what they're doing, because it never comes out perfect, right?" Okay, so there's always a difference between what they thought and what actually happened. Don't worry. We can fix that at the end of the year as we allocate the under-over applied to our what? To our work in process, our finished goods, our cost of goods sold. So we'll adjust that at the end of the year, aren't we? But during the year, we use that predetermined rate because we can't sit there and every time say, okay, let's track all these little costs over to the work in progress, right? So we apply it using this rate. Okay, so we sit here and we have this 2,240. That's the applied, isn't it? And we compare that to what? To the actuals. Is that 2,240 applied? The applied versus the actual, and in this case, they have what? They have underapplied because the actual is more than the applied, isn't it? Right? Okay. They underapplied. Well, I think we'll get into variance analysis as to exactly what's causing this difference, okay, at some point in time. But clearly what? The difference in the number of hours is driving some of this underapplied because, well, no, it's underapplied, right? But we had more hours. So there's something going on that we underestimated what our total cost was going to be. And I can't tell you what it is because this is a made-up problem, but we could analyze it to see, is it because our utilities were more than less than we thought they were going to be? Is it because our depreciation probably shouldn't be the factor? But remember, we look at our fixed cost, and sometimes they may not be fixed, right? So there could be a lot of factors that go into this, but it's okay. We made an estimate, right, just to keep us in the ballpark. Okay, during the year. We're going to fix this by what? We have an underapplied of how much? How much is our underapplied? 760. So since our underapplied is 760, we're going to do what? Are we going to debit this or credit this?
We can debit it into manufacturing overhead.
We've got our manufacturing overhead right here, right? Okay, so we're going to do what? We're going to credit it for 760. Is it 0 now? Is that what I want it to be? Okay, so since it's 0 now, I'm done with that. I got to debit something. What do you want me to debit?
We could either put it all in cost of goods sold.
Could put it all in cost of goods sold, or I could allocate it between what? Cost of goods sold, work in progress, finished goods, right? Would be the other option. I'm not going to allocate it. You kind of can figure out because I'm just going to make up how I would allocate it anyway, right? Based on the relative ending balances of each one of those, right? It's unlikely, like that one problem we were looking at. Remember, I was like, oh, okay, it's the same amount. It's unlikely that you would be able to track your cost to a level of precision that you'd be able to figure out how much of your under or over applied was in work in progress, how much was in finished goods, how much was in your work in progress, which is the way they kind of did that problem. That would be a little crazy. I mean, why would you have to even allocate it if you knew how much should go into each one of those? So that was an unrealistic example that they gave us. But anyway, that's how you would do that, based on the relative percentages of each. Okay, good. So now I say, what journal entry should they make, and what journal entry should they make specific to job 113? And so they debit work in progress for my manufacturing costs. What are my manufacturing costs? Huh? Direct labor, direct material, and my manufacturing overhead applied, right? I'll put a little A out there so we remember that it's the applied amount, right? Okay, and so we gather those costs. That was that total for that job, 58240, and then we're going to go ahead and credit my raw materials. Okay, so we capture the cost, credit my salaries payable, credit my manufacturing overhead applied, right? Weren't those the credits? Okay, and then what? Then I come down and I say, what should Donner do at the completion of the job? And I'm going to debit my finished goods and credit my work in progress. And we've defined that as the cost of goods manufactured, right? So I could ask you on this same question, I could give you the same exact question and just say to you, what is the cost of goods manufactured, couldn't I? And it would be the same answer. In fact, note to self. Let's see. I'll ask you a question for the journal entry to transfer the goods to finished goods. And then the next question will say, what is the cost of goods manufactured for this job? And the people that are, watching Monday Night Football right now or whatever, Thursday Night Football, will sit there and go, oh. Okay? All right. Okay, question? All right, good. Now we come over. Was there a question? Oh, I'm sorry.
At the completion, it doesn't go, the last step is not cost of goods sold, like the last.
No, that's the selling.
Oh,
Okay, completion means that the job is done, right?
okay.
When I sell the product, that's when it goes from finished goods to cost of goods sold, right? When I finally sell it. Okay, which is the next entry here. And so we say what? We say debit the accounts receivable. You sold it for $1,200. Credit the sales because you sold it for $1,200. Then we say debit the cost of goods sold and credit the what? The finished goods because we're selling that, right? Right? Okay, what was this nonsense? This is because I'm an accountant and I can't stop but thinking about accounting issues, which is what? There'd probably be a setup of the allowance for uncollectible receivables and a bad debt expense. I'm not going to expect you to know that for your test, but I couldn't ignore it for some reason. I'd go see a psychiatrist about that at some point. But what happens? We're sitting here and we would debit the cost of goods sold, credit the finished goods because that thing is done, right? Okay. Okay, good. Come down. And let's take a look at a couple chapter 4 questions. Any question on that? Maybe I should summarize that before we go to these other ones. Any question on this? What we did here? I guess I can't make the screen smaller. I wanted to try to back this up a little bit. Maybe if I put it to the home. Okay, I want to back this thing up a little bit because look, guys. Okay. So much for this idea. Now I'm going to have to close this and start over again probably. View. I want what? I want page. One page. Give me one page, please. Thank you, God. Okay, now you take a look here, and all I was trying to do was show you that this is the comprehensive question that I've been promising you, right? And if you take a look, you had to start from the high-low method, and you had to take it all the way to where we finally sold the goods, didn't you? Okay, and so this is the comprehensive question that I was talking about. And if you count the number of questions on this, you've got what? Something in the neighborhood of it ended up being like 7, 8, 9, 10 questions, whatever. Is there any way that you can pass this exam if you can't work your way, grind your way through this thing? Okay, so even though we're only using multiple choice questions, this is like a full-blown, full kind of problem, isn't it? Okay, because if you don't get the answer to number one, you don't get the variable cost, you can't get the fixed cost. You can't get the fixed cost, you can't get the equation for the line, for my overhead cost. You can't get that. You can't get the predetermined overhead rate. You can't get the predetermined overhead rate. You can't figure out the cost of job 113, whatever, right? Okay. Okay, good. All right, so let's take a look at this question now. Which of the following statements about process costing is incorrect? And what? We don't trace it to units of product, do we? Is that correct? That's incorrect, isn't it? We do it by what? Department, don't we? Okay, good. Number 24. Which one of these is going to use process costing? Wouldn't use job order costing, which is what? That question kind of got returned funny up here. But which one are we going to use process costing for? The what? Paper mill is the answer. And if you take a look at this thing, you look and you see that what? These others are obviously going to be job order costing, aren't they? Okay, so our what? Our restoring old cars, a framing shop that builds picture frames to order for individual customers, a masonry company that builds brick walls, bulkheads, designed by architects. That's giving you a tip that they're going to be unique, aren't they? Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at. That's it for that chat, for that practice exam? Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. There's more here? Oh, okay. I didn't see it. Let me use the mouse to get down here. Okay. Okay, well, let me close this. Don't save, because for some reason they disappeared on me. And let me go back to I learned.
Oh yeah, it's a weighted average question, and you said you're not going to cover that, right?
Which one?
It's a weighted average.
The weighted average method for, yeah, equivalent units. Yeah, we're not going to do any of that. Yeah, we're not going to get into that. There's weighted average, there's FIFO, but we're not doing any of that.
Yeah, that's the missing question.
Oh, is that the missing questions? Oh, okay. Thank you. So that's what's going on. Yeah, those questions. Thank you, sir. Those questions were using equivalent units, and I'm not gonna test that. That's why I took them out. So it stops there. The rest of those questions, I'm not using those. The rest of the questions that were in that file, we're not going to do that, unless you want me to. Huh? No, you didn't learn that in finance. You learned the huh? You learned that for inventory methods, but that was for retail. We're talking about using those methods to track our equivalent units for a process costing system, and we're not going to get into that in here. In your financial, yes, they test you on FIFO, LIFO, weighted average, all that, but that's retail inventory. Yeah, we're not doing that here.
That practice midterm one, the revised one, only goes to number 9 on the question.
It only goes to what I covered. Yeah, what was that? It wasn't question.
It doesn't go to what we just did. It stops short. It goes to point 4. If you click it right now, that link doesn't go.
Which one? This one here?
Midterm 1 for chapters 2 through 4.
Uh-huh.
We just did that problem, the whole thing, but it only stopped at 9. It didn't go to 10 and 11 and 12.
So it only took you to...
Mine, it just stops at 9. It doesn't finish yet. I just printed it. Yeah. I didn't see any.
Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead then and let's take a look at this next one. Okay. And this one is going to be similar, where we're going to start out with the high-low method. I'm not sure what else I can do. It's there now, so maybe go back and look and print them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just saying I don't know what else I would say at that point, but go back and look. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this this one here, and we've got this Cook Cake Company that bakes custom wedding cakes, and we have actual overhead cost and activity for the first 6 months. You guys didn't find this one? You got it? Okay. Okay. Do you guys want to do this? We can, I mean, I kind of know how to do these already, so it's up to you if you don't want to do them. Okay? Okay, so let's just go ahead and let's take a look. I mean, the option is, you want to do the test next time? Okay, so I'm thinking, this should be helpful to get you to feel like you're ready for the test, because when you do the test, it's going to look just like this. There's going to be something like this that you're going to do. So I'm thinking this is the thing we ought to be doing to get ready for the exam, right? Okay, so we come over and we take a look at this, and we've got this cake company, and they say that they're going to produce these cakes, and they determine that each cake requires about 1 hour of oven time. So notice here we have the number of cakes, but it's also what? The number of oven hours, isn't it? Okay, so the trick in this question was reading that one phrase there. That kind of confused some people because they were like, huh, what? What's the number of oven hours that were used? Or they'd say, what's the number of cakes that were produced? And it's like, yeah, right. It's the same thing, isn't it? Okay, so then what? So then we say Cook has determined that each cake produced requires 1 hour. Using the high-low method, help Cook to determine their variable overhead cost per oven, per oven hour. So is this just like that other one that we saw a minute ago? Right? We got to figure out the variable first. So how do we do this using the high-low method? I would suggest, by the way, you bring a highlighter with you to the exam when we have it, so that you can sit there and quickly highlight the high and low. It's much easier. The hardest part of these problems is to find the high and find the low, and then remember where it is as you start to make your calculations. For me, if I don't do it, then I got to go back in the table again and say, well, which one was it? And I start wasting time, right? So which is the high here? June is the high. Do you think June should be high for wedding cakes? Okay, and then what? The low is January. Yeah, I suppose so. Not as many people are going to get married during January, whatever, right? Okay, whatever. And so we sit here and we want to come up with the variable. How would we do that? Who wants to set this up for me? 15,817. 15,817 minus what? Minus the 6,555, the low? Okay, good. Divided by 1,012. Good. Minus 74. Excellent. And what do you come up with? 9.8742. Okay, good. That's my variable cost per unit. Right? Okay, good. So I was able to get that one right. So now I should be able to figure out what is the fixed. Who wants to set this one up for me? Don't be shy. Well, if we're asking you for fixed cost, it's going to be what? And I'm not sure if this is what you said, sir, but total cost, right? Minus what? Minus variable cost is going to equal my fixed cost, isn't it? Okay, so whoa, wait. Sorry, I'm not processing what you're saying, Timmy. Start over again. Okay, go ahead. You're losing me at 74.
No, that's a number of hours.
I'm sorry, you're losing me at 74.
24
We're
is the low in the oven hours.
okay. What do you want to do with that 74? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you have to type.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't hang. Okay, look, that's all right. Let's just do it. Now it's total cost, right? That's what this says right here. That I now erased. Total cost, okay? And so my total cost, and you want to be higher, or you want to be low? You want to be low? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm saying my total cost is at 6,555. Is that the number? At the low? 6,555? Okay, good. And then I'm going to come over. I don't know why I'm not using the mouse. And then I'm going to take that minus my variable cost. Variable cost is 987, right? 9.87 times what?
42, but it doesn't work in here.
98742, you say? Okay. Times what? Times the 74 units. Okay. And so that's my variable cost, isn't it? And so that difference gives me what? The fixed cost, which is what?
58.29.
58.29 roughly.
Yes. But here you cannot, like, you have to keep it 9.87 to get the right answer.
Okay, if you just point, you mean 9.87?
Yeah, not the.
And you don't put this 72 in there?
But in the
Okay.
exam, we don't round.
Well, no, look, guys. Is there a question, guys? Because there's been like an ongoing conversation that I've been trying to ignore for the whole time while we're up here. You know, I can't have 52 different classes going at once. Look, could you get any of the other answers? Okay, so I'm not going to sit there and, say, okay, well, this one, it'll have to be only I'll put questions in there in which you have to hold the irrational number in the calculator to get it, or only some of them you won't have to hold the irrational number in there to get the answer. I can't design a test like that because I don't know what the test banks do with these questions, right? I can promise you that there will be no confusion as to the right answer based on rounding. Okay, so whether you use the 9.87 or you use the 9.8742, you still can only get A as the right answer, right? Right? Okay, so make sure you don't let that one kind of mess you up. And well, wait a minute, it's not perfect or it's a little bit off. There will be a clear right answer, I promise you. Okay? Okay, so this is the right answer here. And so now I come down and we say that what? We have 5,000 oven hours were used to produce how many cakes? 5,000 cakes. It's an oven hour per cake, isn't it? Okay, so we have 5,000. What is Cook's total estimated overhead cost? Now, this question is requiring that you sit there and you make the leap to know that you have to come up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, right? With the other one, I sat there and kind of spoon-fed you and said, okay, now give me the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. Well, I'm not necessarily going to do that. I expect you to know that you got to come up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate now, don't you? Okay, so what would be the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate?
5,000 times.
So you want to take what? You want to take 9.87, right?
If you do exact decimals, like if you're doing 9.8742, you come up with 5,824, but the answer is 5,829. Just so you know. Yeah, I got that too.
You come up with what? 5,000.
For number two. You saw number two. Number two.
Oh, it's because they
Excuse me? Are you talking about number 2 now? What's the question with number 2?
doesn't come out to be that.
So you're doing when you do the formula and you do it like 9.8742 times 74 units, and then you subtract it by 6,555, the answer is not 5,829, it's 5,824.
It's because of the rounding that.
So
Didn't we just talk about that?
no, you said to use the full decimals, not round.
Guys, I just mentioned that. I just said how that's going to work on the exam. I just said that on the exam, I'm not going to sit there and have it always be that you don't use the full number or always have it be that you use the rounded number, because the test banks do all kinds of things, and I'm not going to sit there and recalculate what the test bank did to make sure, okay, will it always be that they have to have the full irrational number, or will it always be that they have to have the rounded number? What I can promise you is that there will only be one clear right answer based on, the either the unrounded number or the not rounded number. I mean, no matter what number you use, you would have to have picked A here, wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah, because it's the closest one.
It's by far the closest one, right? And if you run into trouble on the exam, you can sit there and you can ask me, hey, John, how come I'm not getting the exact number? And I'll tell you, you're fine. Okay? So, where are we now? You had to sit here and you had to figure out what the estimated overhead costs were. So you have to do what? 9.875 times what? Times 5,000 plus what? 5 what? Plus the fixed cost of 5,829, right? And that gives me a total here of what? 55,000 what? 200? Okay, probably for this one you had to do what? You had to use the unrounded number. Okay? But again, there's only one right answer here, right? That's the takeaway from this. I'm not going to have these numbers come out perfectly so that, God comes down and says, nice job on every one of these, but there's only one clear right answer, 55,179. Okay? All right, so we come down and we have what? We have that Cook believes that oven hours drive its overhead. What is the what? predetermined overhead rate. So if you take what? 55,200. If we're going to produce these 5,000 cakes, you divide that by what?
5,000.
By the 5,000. That gives you 1104.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. So we've seen enough? We're done? Well, I don't know. I'm just feeling like this is not helping at all. I don't know. I'm not a fan of just sitting up here talking to myself and everyone's, well, you're 2 cents off. What's going on? So, is there any benefit that's being had by this? Should I go back over some slides or something, or do you want to go through this thing that's going to be like your test? Go ahead. So what do you guys want to do? I mean, it's your class, you know. All I'm trying to do is show you the questions the way they're going to be on the test. That's all I'm trying to do here. But I don't know. If you don't want to do it, we can go home or we can do something else. Okay, so you want to do this? Okay, so we've got this, what, 55,200 divided by the 5,000. Then what? Then I come down and I say that Cook receives an order of a 3-tiered layer wedding cake, whatever, and assigns job ticket 628 to this. And the cost appeared on the job ticket for 628. Direct materials is 200. Direct labor, 8 hours at $16 per hour. Total actual overhead cost for the year was $52,300. And then there was this amount paid for $12,000 for a cost associated with it for cake shows during the year. What should we do with that $12,000? We ignore it, right? That's going to be a selling and administrative cost, right? And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to do what? Pick up the direct materials of 200, good. Pick up the labor of 8 times 16 hours, okay? And then what? 128, sorry. Not 16. 128. Eight times 16 equals 128. Then what? I don't know why I'm putting that line there. So we've got my direct labor. We've got our manufacturing overhead. I gave away the answer. We've got our direct materials. We've got our direct labor. What else do we need? We need the manufacturing overhead, not estimated, but what? Applied, right? Okay, so how much should be applied here? How much should be applied? Yes, I can scroll up. So I'm sitting here, and way up at the beginning of the problem, I'm going to scroll all the way up. They said that what? No, maybe not all the way up, but each cake requires how many hours of oven time? 1 hour of oven time, and we're using what? We're using hours of oven time as our driver, aren't we? So if it's one cake, how many hours did it use? 1 hour. So what's our predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Predetermined manufacturing overhead rate is 1104, isn't it? So that means we need to add what to this? 1104. It was 1 hour of time. Our predetermined manufacturing overhead rate was what? 1104, and they used 1 hour of oven time, didn't they? Okay. So you go ahead and you add in that 1104, and does that give me the 339? So we just had to pick up the 1 hour. So that got a little bit tricky too, didn't it? that you had to realize, well, wait a minute, it's just 1 hour and I have to apply my overhead based on oven hours. If it's 1 hour per cake, that's 1104, isn't it? Okay. Now, you could say, oh, that's horrible. Well, look, you could, sometimes you got to sit there and look at the question and say, well, look, what's the difference between the choices that I'm getting here and what? And the answer that I'm understanding, and you could have backed into the 1104 that way as well, right? Okay. Okay. So now what? Now they tell me that they produced 4878 cakes in 2016. If they produce 4878 cakes, what's the applied overhead? How do I get it? 4878 is the what? Is the number of cakes, the actual number of cakes they produce, and then what am I supposed to do with that number? Multiply it by 1104, the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate of 1104. That's the applied, isn't it? And that gives me what? 53,000 what? 853.12, you say? Okay. And then what? Minus, did I say up here what the actual was? Down. Number 5. Okay, number 5, we said that the actual, where'd 5 go? Actual is what? 52,300? Okay, so the actual versus the applied is the under or over applied, right? So it's this 53,000 versus what? Someone tell me the number again. 52,300. That's the actual. So we are what? We are over applied. The applied was more than the actual, wasn't it? Right? Okay. This is the same thing we did in that last problem. Okay, good. Then when the when the cake is sold, what journal entry should Cook make? When the cake is sold, what journal entry should they make? When the cake is sold, what journal entry should they make? Debit cost of goods sold and credit the finished goods, right? Huh? Okay. Now this is, if I said when the thing is finished, then that would be D, right? Debit the finished goods and credit the work in progress when they complete the cake. But when it's sold, debit cost of goods sold, finished credit, debit cost of goods sold, credit finished goods. Okay, good. If they sold the cake for $500, what would be the profit on the sale? How do I get it? Good. 500 minus the cost. The cost was what? 382? What do we have up there? 339? So that's what? This, what'd you say? 161? Okay. Where'd I get what? 339 is the cost that we had gathered for the cake up there. So we got the direct labor, the direct materials, the manufacturing overhead, and then we went ahead and did what? Subtracted the that from the sales price. That gave me the 161. Yeah, no, that's fine. It's kind of hard to see everything with this thing flipping back and forth. Okay. All right. You want to take a break, or you want to just power through this and finish this one and get out of here? Dumb question, right? Okay. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at our direct material, the following costs were incurred, and we got to figure out what the prime costs are, right? Prime costs are what?
Direct material and direct labor.
Direct material and direct labor. So this is just a pure definitional question. So what is it? 29 plus 24 gives me 53,000? Okay. Is that question too easy for the test? Okay. When the activity level declines within the relevant range, what should happen with respect to the following? Fixed cost per unit will do what? Will decrease, right? Let's say I have a fixed cost of 100,000. Huh? I mean, fixed costs will increase if the level of activity declines. So I have fixed cost of 100,000, and let's say I'm producing 2 units. What's my fixed cost per unit? Fixed cost per unit equals what? 50,000. Okay. Okay, good. And then what? Then we sit here and we produce, instead of 2 units, we only produce 1 unit. So my fixed costs are still going to be 100,000, aren't they? But now I'm going to divide it by the 1 unit, and so now my fixed costs per unit have gone up, haven't they? To 100,000 in this example. Right? So my fixed cost per unit increased, didn't it? Okay. Then what? Variable cost per unit will, I don't have to give you an explanation of that. Variable cost per unit stays the same per unit, doesn't it? Okay. Take a look at 11. Which of the following costs is classified as a prime cost? And it's what? Direct materials, yes. Indirect materials, no, right? That's going to be part of my overhead, so it would be considered a conversion cost, wouldn't it? Okay, good. Which of the following entries would correctly record the application of overhead? When you apply the overhead, what do you do? When you apply the overhead, what do you do? Huh? What'd you say? You tell me. Is it? You want to say it's D, right? Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to debit the work in process. I'm going to credit the manufacturing overhead, right? Okay. Okay, how about this one? So we might have seen this one before, that it won't hurt us to work it again here. Is that where we are now? Is this the next one? Okay. So what is the predetermined overhead rate? Who wants to set this up for me? $1,630,960. Okay, good. Plus the machine hours of 74,000. Do you mind if I do this with it then? I'm just going to put 74,000 in parentheses. Times $7.67, which is my variable cost per unit. Right? Okay, so what's the total here for this? 2,198,000 what? 540. Okay, good. And you divide that by 74,000. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. I get excited there. Okay. You divide that by 74,000, and that gives me what? 2971 is my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. Right? I could give you that same problem on your test and simply ask you what is, if they produced 70,000 units, what is the applied manufacturing overhead, right? I could give you that same exact question and then just ask you if they produce 70,000 units, what is the applied manufacturing overhead? Well, not produce 70,000 units. I shouldn't say it like that. They incurred 70,000 estimated machine hours. Let me say it that way.
Just want to make sure it's 2,198,000 divided by 74,000, right?
Yes, divide by 74,000. Yes, sometimes the thing doesn't. I write the letter and then it disappears it right after that. Thank you. Divided by 74,000. If they incurred 70,000 machine hours, what is the applied manufacturing overhead?
29.71 times 70.
Huh?
29.71 times 70,000.
29.71 times what?
70,000.
Times the 70,000. That's how you apply it, don't you? You get the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, like we've been doing, and then you multiply that by the actual number of driver units incurred, hours, machine, or direct labor hours, whatever, and that gives me what?
287,970.
Two
2079700.
two zero 79700. You say?
Yes.
That number right there?
Yes.
Okay. Is that right? That doesn't look right.
It's
2,079,079. 079. Thank you. 700. That's all right. No problem. We make mistakes in here. That's fine. We just don't want to make them on the test. Right? Okay. This is how I do my test, guys. I look at what I have given you to study from, and then I say, okay, I'm going to take that same question, and I'm going to do all the questions like that. But there are some questions. I'll look back at what I've done, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to ask this instead of that from that same fact pattern. But it all falls into what? What we've been going through this process. High-low method. Come up with your variable cost per unit. Come up with your total variable cost versus your fixed versus your total cost for your variable cost for your fixed cost. Can you then plug in a number and tell me what the total estimated overhead is? Can you divide that by the number of estimated units? Can you come up with the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Can you then apply the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Can you compare the applied to the actual to tell me what the under or over applied is? That's it. Don't imagine that there's something more here than what we're doing. Okay? Okay, good. How about number 14? Didn't we do this one before? No? So, this is the last one we're going to do, guys. I'm going to go home. I'm tired. So how are we going to set this one up? It is asking for the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. How do you come up with a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Huh? Okay, that's correct for this problem, but give it to me again, sir. But this time, just tell me, bigger picture thinking. How do you come up with your predetermined manufacturing overhead rate? Estimated total overhead divided by what? Estimated, I guess it's machine hours, whatever the driver is. Okay, good. So what's you're telling me that you went through this list and you're telling me that you said rent on factory building is a overhead item, isn't it? Right? And you told me that depreciation on factory building is an overhead item, right? And you told me that anything else? That indirect materials, thank you, is an overhead item, right? What else? The insurance on the factory building is probably going to be an overhead item, right? And when you total all those up, you get this 42,000. And then you take that 42,000 and you divide that by what? By the 20,000 number of units. That gives you $2.10 per machine hour, doesn't it? What happens if the company actually incurs 25,000 machine hours? What's the applied? $22,000 machine hours. Set it up for me. Huh? 25. Set it up for me. 25,000 times what? Times $2.10 gives me 52,500. Okay, so that's the actual. I mean the applied, excuse me. That's the applied, right? That's the applied, right? If I tell you that the actual was 50,000, what's the under over applied? Over applied, good. By how much? 2,500, right? Okay. So, as a result of this transaction, cost of goods sold should do what? As a result of this fact pattern, I don't know about transaction, it's not a transaction, but as a result of this fact pattern, cost of goods sold should do what? Should it increase or decrease? Cost of goods sold should what? Say it again. Should decrease, shouldn't it? Right? Because I've done what? I've over-applied. If I've over-applied, I got a credit in the overhead account. I'm going to have to debit it to zero it out. I have to what? I have to credit something. And if I call out cost of goods sold, and you say, well, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to allocate it? Well, yeah, but still, cost of goods sold will come down by some amount, right? Okay. All right, let's do one more. Okay. Let's look at this Crib Corporation. Uses direct labor hours and its predetermined overhead rate. At the beginning of the year, they estimated 17,900 hours and total estimated manufacturing overhead of 341,890, right? Okay. The actual direct labor hours were 16,700 and the actual manufacturing overhead for the period was 336,890. Okay, so can we first figure out what the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate was? Who wants to set this one up?
The overhead, 341,890.
Took the estimated overhead, 341,890, good.
Divided by the hours.
Divided by the estimated hours, very good, 17,900, right? Okay, good job.
1910.
That gave me 1910. Now what do you want to do?
Multiply it by the actual hours of 16,700.
Multiply it by the actual hours, good, of 16,700, and that gives me, this is the actual or the applied? This gives me the applied. That's right.
318,970.
Good, 318,970. Beautiful. If I can write it. 318,970. That's the applied, isn't it?
And then
Compare it to the actual, which they told me, they just gave me that was 336,890. In that other problem, they made me pull the things out that made up the overhead. I could do that too. I could take the same problem and make you pull a bunch of things out of the list to see which ones are the actual overheads, right? But this one, they went ahead and they gave it to me. And I'm just going to go ahead and point down to the solution here rather than try to write that whole thing. It's 336,890, which is the actual versus the applied that we just figured out, right? And so we are what? Huh? We're under applied, right? Okay. Okay, good. How about this one now? So you see how there's going to be that one big comprehensive problem, and then there's going to be what? Some little individual ones. I don't know if they're little, but individual ones that are sort of standalone but keep testing you on the same. When you really think about it, it's two chapters, guys. It's chapter 2 and 3, nothing from chapter 1, and then what? And then chapter 4 is just can you call out those. So I'm limited in the things that I'm going to be able to ask you here, right? Okay, so it starts to become a variation on the same theme over and over and over again. So we have this job 593. And what are they asking me for here? They want to know what the total cost. Does that sound familiar? Okay, just sort of like that cake one. And the other one, the Donner people, whatever, that we were looking at. So what happens? 3190 is the direct materials. Direct labor, I think you can figure out in your sleep, which is what? The direct labor hours times the rate per hour. And then we simply had to know to pick up the 175 machine hours. And we needed to know that we should pick up the what? The predetermined overhead rate, right? How easy was this question? You'll be surprised how many people that aren't here right now will miss a question just like that on the test. Question? Okay, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at this one. Or we want to go home? Okay, one more. Okay, let's look at this one. Spectrum Manufacturing had the following information in its records. Predetermined overhead rate, 125% of direct labor costs. Remember, guys, we said it doesn't have to be based on a production number, on a non-financial number. We could use a financial number to come up with our predetermined overhead rate, right? And so they tell us that it's 125% of our direct labor costs. We have our estimated direct labor costs. We have our actual, right? And then they say based on these facts, and they want me to figure out if we're over or under applied, right? Okay, so do you want me to pick up my estimated, or do you want me, my estimated direct labor cost or my actual direct labor cost? That's not what I asked. Do you want me to pick up my actual direct labor cost or my estimated direct labor cost to answer this? I pick up the actual direct labor cost. I'm applying them based on the actual driver. Now the driver is my direct labor cost times my predetermined manufacturing overhead rate, which they told me was 1.25, 125%, right? Right? So the amount that gets applied is going to be what? This, then you can kind of see the number peeking out down here. 105,000. So that's the applied, isn't it? Actual over here, applied over here. 105,000 gets applied, doesn't it? And so if you take a look at the difference here, we've got 3,000, don't we? We have over applied. Just looking at the total of the amounts that were the actual. Right? Same thing every time. Every single one of these. If you're getting bored, it's your fault. You wanted to be a business major. If you wanted to have fun, you should have studied art. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one. During October, Dornabori, whatever corporation, incurred 60,000 of direct labor cost and 5,000 of indirect labor cost. The journal entry to record the accrual of these wages is to debit the work in process for the direct, debit the manufacturing overhead for the actual overhead on this, and credit the salaries payable, right? Right? What's going to be the credit to manufacturing overhead? If they went ahead and they debited this for 5,000, right? That's what they told us there. What's the credit? You don't have to give me a number. Tell me what will be credited, huh? No, they're showing me that the salaries got credited. And I'm saying, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, salaries was the other side of that, debit. But what would be credited to manufacturing overhead? That's what I'm asking. What gets credited to the manufacturing overhead, huh? The applied gets credited. Right? Okay. Let's take a look at this one. Solidad Corporation had 36,000 of raw materials on hand on December 1st. During the month, the corporation purchased an additional 71,000 of raw materials. The journal entry recorded the purchase of raw materials would include, a debit to raw materials when you purchase them, right? What's the ending balance in raw materials? Right? Let's set it up. I got raw materials. Raw materials had a beginning balance of how much? 36,000. So the balance was 36,000. Why am I writing it over there when I have balance over here? Balance is how much? 36,000. Good. And then they did what? They purchased 71,000. So we debit that 71,000. What's that bring the balance to? Huh? 107,000? Okay, good. And then I go ahead and I do what? Oh, didn't it give me the information? Sorry, guys. So if I told you that work in process, 50,000 worth of of raw materials was debited to work in process.
That's the other question. 105,000 was debited to work in process. 50,000 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 was debited to
if I tell you that $50,000 was a debit for materials, for direct materials, to work in process, and there was no indirect materials, what's the ending balance?
Means that we credit 50,000 for raw materials.
We would have to have credited 50,000 for the raw materials, right? And so the ending balance here now is what is it? 57,000 would be the ending balance. I thought they gave me the amount that went to work in process. I had to make an amount out up there, but the ending is 57,000. Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at this one now. And at the beginning of December, Sneed Corporation had 32,000 raw materials on hand. During the month, the corporation purchased an additional 71,000. During December, 75,000 raw materials were requisitioned for the storeroom for use in production. The credits are what? 75,000. Now, they say we're requisitioned from the storeroom for use in production. Why is that a little vague for me to be absolutely sure that this is the right answer, other than the fact that maybe none of the other answers would be even close? So I would have had to have done that, right? For the amount that was requisitioned. I have a problem. I'm fine with the credit. I have a problem with this debit. How do I know that this is all work in process? Goes to work in process. Could there be an amount that should go somewhere else? Do they tell me that it was requisitioned from the storeroom for use in production for direct materials? They could have issued some grease for use in production that would have been what? Indirect materials, right? And what would be the journal entry then? If they say they told me that only 72,000 was direct and the rest was indirect materials. Now what do I do? I know I have to debit something for 3,000, don't I? What am I going to debit? Huh? Say it again. I'm going to debit manufacturing overhead for $3,000 because this is my actual indirect materials, right? And then I will apply it based on the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. And if I apply more than the actual, that will be the over applied. If I have an actual that's more than the applied, that will be the under applied, right?
So if we were to write this out, it'll just raw material will still be credited for 75,000.
Yeah. Raw materials credit for 75,000, and I'm saying that they say they requisitioned from the storeroom. I get the credit of 75,000. I'm saying the way they wrote this problem, I mean, this is probably the only one you could have possibly have gotten, but I'm saying because maybe if we look at the other ones, there's no way that it could have been. There better not be one where there's a debit to, also a debit to manufacturing overhead, or they have, there's only two choices. I see. They're just showing me the entry here, that it's work in process. I see. So the question was what? The credits is correct. It's 75,000 for this question. I guess I'm arguing with the solution because the solution just assumed that it all went to work in process, and I'm saying some of it could have gone to what? Manufacturing overhead, right? Okay. Okay, good. That's enough of those journal entry questions. The rest of these, don't worry about those. Those are, again, the equivalent unit calculations. Okay, a couple things, guys. For next time, what I'm going to do is I'm still going to put those additional exams up there for you to look at. I'll probably put another 2, seem about the right size for our tolerance to be able to go through it. Okay, but coming to class is an optional thing for next week. Because if you're feeling like, hey, I've got this and I figured it out and, I don't need to see John sit here and, struggle with the computer and, write all over the thing, that's fine. I will be here. I'll be here, and so we'll just see how it turns out. If there's specific questions that people have, we can turn it into an office hour, whatever, like in-class office hour, because I don't see any point now in me doing more of these and that it's the same thing over and over. So I'll give you those questions. You can go through them yourself, or you can come to class next time and I'll be here and we'll go over it, okay? Okay, guys, I will see you on a week from today on Thursday if you decide to come in. Make sure you're here for the test with your Scantron.
I just have one question.
Sure, can you mind turning that light on just so I can see a little better? And I'm going to, I guess I'll stop this.